Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world one book at a time.
Today, we're turning our attention to a text that, I think it's fair to say, fundamentally rewired the way we understand the politics of appearance. We're taking a deep dive into The Beauty Myth by Naomi Wolf.
And I have to be honest with you, right out of the gate. When I first saw this title on our reading list, I had a bit of a knee-jerk reaction.
Oh, sure.
I thought, okay, we're going to talk about airbrush magazine covers,
Yeah.
or maybe why I shouldn't feel guilty about eating a bagel, or, some tips on self-esteem.
Right, the usual conversation around this topic.
Exactly. But having read it, that is the tiniest, most superficial tip of a very, very large iceberg. This book is heavy. It frames beauty not as something aesthetic or artistic or even biological, but as a rigid system of social control.
And that is the crucial distinction we need to make right at the start of this deep dive. This isn't a discussion on self-help. We aren't here to critique makeup tips or your individual style choices. If you want to wear lipstick, wear lipstick. That's not what this is about. We are here, and this is the purpose of our channel, to analyze institutional incentives, cultural mechanisms, and economic structures.
We're looking at structure, not blame.
Exactly. We're looking at systems, not individuals.
So the central premise that Wolf puts forward revolves around this massive historical paradox. She points out that in the late 20th century, we're talking the 1980s and early 90s when she was writing, women had gained more legal rights, more professional power, more access to higher education than ever before in history.
A huge leap forward, objectively.
You'd think logically that would mean more freedom across the board.
You would absolutely assume that. As barriers fall in the boardroom and the voting booth, they should fall everywhere else.
Right. But Wolf argues the exact opposite happened regarding physical standards. As women broke through that glass ceiling, the pressure to look a certain way didn't lessen. It actually intensified. It got more specific, more expensive, and, crucially, more time-consuming.
Which brings us to the core question of this deep dive. How do these aesthetic standards function not as personal preferences, but as a political and economic system?
That's the question.
Wolf's thesis, and it's a big one, is that the beauty myth isn't really about women at all. It's not about sex, and it's not about love or attraction. It's about power.
Power.
She argues that just as women breached the power structure, this myth rose up to effectively checkmate that power.
It's a counter-horse.
Precisely. A political backlash. It's a mechanism designed to drain women's time, money, and psychological energy.
So they wouldn't have enough left over to disrupt the status quo.
That's it. If you're exhausted from dieting and broke from buying anti-aging creams, you are, frankly, less likely to organize a strike or run for office.
That brings us to the historical context, which Wolf calls the backlash. We need to sit in that timeline for a second because it's really important. We're coming out of the massive revolutions of the 1970s feminist movement, and we're entering the 1980s.
Right. To really understand the machinery of the myth, you have to look at what it replaced. In the 1950s, you had what Betty Friedan so famously called the feminine mystique. This was the prevailing social control of that era, this idea that a woman's only true fulfillment was in domesticity. Her geography was, the kitchen and the nursery.
It was the iron curtain of the home. She was contained there.
Yes, perfectly put. But the second wave of feminism systematically dismantled that myth. Women proved they could work, lead, innovate, and exist outside the home. So the feminine mystique stopped working as an effective control mechanism.
It lost its power.
But Wolf's key insight here is that power structures don't just disappear when they're defeated, they mutate. They find a new container. So as the social coercion of domesticity faded, the social coercion of beauty stepped right in to take its place.
So the control just shifted location.
It shifted from the home to the body.
So instead of being told you must keep a perfect house, women were told you must keep a perfect body.
Exactly. The body became the new domestic sphere, the one place where women were expected to labor endlessly, without complaint, to prove their worth.
And speaking of labor, she uses a term that really stuck with me to describe the mechanics of this. The third shift.
Yes.
We're all familiar with the first shift. That's your paid job, your 9 to 5. And sociologists have talked for years about the second shift.
The domestic labor, cooking, cleaning, childcare.
Right, which studies show women still do, disproportionately. But Wolf introduces this idea of a third shift.
The beauty labor.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's all the time spent dieting, exercising specifically for aesthetics, not for health, applying makeup, researching skincare, shopping for the right clothes, recovering from surgery, just worrying. worrying about weight. It's a massive, unaccounted for expenditure of time and energy.
And the genius of the third shift, if you look at it from a pure systems perspective, is that it's designed to be inexhaustible.
What do you mean?
Unlike housework, which has a finish line for the day, eventually the dishes are done, the kids are asleep. Beauty work, under this myth, is never done.
Because you're fighting biology. You're
Yeah.
fighting time itself.
You're fighting time. It is a state of constant, unending maintenance. This is how Wolf defines the beauty myth explicitly as a currency system, much like the gold standard.
A currency system.
A currency determined by politics. And its function is to keep women economically subordinate even as they earn more money.
Okay, let's unpack that economic argument because it completely flicks the script on how we usually talk about this. Usually the conversation is, oh, beauty is natural, it's biological, men are just visual creatures.
Wolf challenges that biological determinism head-on. She calls it out as a convenient lie, a narrative that serves the system.
So what's the evidence she uses?
Well, the common narrative is that beauty is some universal evolutionary mandate, that we're all hardwired to appreciate a specific waist-to-hip ratio or a specific nose shape because it signals fertility.
Right, the evolutionary psychology argument.
Wolf just says, no, look at the actual evidence.
She actually cites Darwin against himself here, doesn't she?
She does. It's a great point. Darwin himself wrote that he wasn't fully convinced by his own explanation of beauty in sexual selection because the standards varied so wildly between cultures and even between different groups of animals. Wolf points to anthropology and primate behavior.
Right.
In many primate species, for example, females are the sexual initiators, and there isn't this rigid hierarchy of beauty that determines who gets to mate. The idea of a passive female being chosen for her looks is, well, it's not a biological universal.
And if you just look at human history, the ideal changes faster than evolution could ever possibly keep up. I mean, we went from the voluptuous, soft ideal of the Victorian era, or even the 1950s Marilyn Monroe figure.
The Twiggy era in the 60s.
Then to the athletic supermodel, then the heroin chic of the 90s. Evolution doesn't work in decades. Culture does.
That's her entire point. If beauty were a biological imperative, it would be static. The fact that it swings so wildly proves to Wolf that it is a cultural construction. It is a currency system.
And like any currency, its value can be manipulated by the market.
Exactly. And the myth posits that beauty creates a hierarchy among women, which serves to divide them. It prevents the kind of solidarity that leads to political change.
I see. So if you're busy competing with a woman next to you for beauty value, which is presented as this scarce resource,
you aren't organizing with her for equal pay. You're not seeing her as an ally. You're seeing her as the competition.
Okay, so if it's a currency system, let's talk about how it's spent and enforced. Wolf breaks this down into several key institutions. The first major system she analyzes is the workplace. And this is where she introduces the concept of the PBQ.
The professional beauty qualification. This is such a critical concept for understanding the modern workplace, even more so today than when she wrote it.
How does she define it?
As women entered the workforce in droves in the 70s and 80s, the marketplace faced a kind of crisis. How do we regulate this new labor pool? How do we maintain existing hierarchies? Wolf argues that, in response, many professions were quietly reclassified as display professions.
It wasn't just models or actresses anymore.
No, suddenly it was secretaries, lawyers, news anchors, executives. The requirement wasn't just to be competent at your job, it was to look professional. And professional became code for beautiful, according to a very specific, expensive, high-maintenance standard.
And she brings receipts to back this up. The legal cases she details in this section are absolutely wild.
They're shocking.
The St. Cross v. Playboy Club case. Okay, obviously it's Playboy, so appearance is explicitly part of the gig. But the legal precedent it set was terrifying for everyone else.
It was a landmark for all the wrong reasons. In that case, the court ruled that the employer, not the woman herself, is the sole expert on the woman's appearance.
But a huge shift in power.
It's massive. St. Cross argued she still had her bunny image, she fit the costume, she looked the same as when she was hired, but Hugh Hefner's organization just said, no, you've lost it, and the court sided with the employer.
So my own assessment of my appearance is irrelevant.
It's irrelevant. This established a legal ground where an employer can fire a woman based on their subjective evaluation of her looks. It established appearance as what's called a bona fide occupational qualification, or a BFOQ.
It took the power of definition away from the individual and gave it entirely to the corporation. But then you have the Christine Kraft case, which is even more mainstream and, frankly, more infuriating.
I agree.
She wasn't a Playboy bunny. She was a TV news anchor. She was good at her job, winning journalism awards, getting good ratings, but she was fired. And why? Because the focus groups and her boss says she was, and this is a quote, too old, too unattractive, and not deferential to men.
Not deferential to men. That is the smoking gun in that verdict, isn't it?
It's unbelievable.
It reveals the behavioral requirement that's hidden inside the beauty requirement. It's not just about how you look, it's about how you act. It's about obedience.
Kraft's case just highlighted this massive double standard we still see everywhere today. You have the distinguished aging male anchor, the Walter Cronkite or Dan Rather types. Their lines, their gray hair, the bags under their eyes, those are all read as signs of authority.
They signal experience, gravitas, a life lived. They add to his value.
But for the female anchor,
For her, those exact same signs of aging are read as failure. Wolf calls this erasure. As a woman gains experience and wisdom, which should make her more powerful and influential, she simultaneously ages out of the beauty qualification.
her competence goes up, but her perceived value goes down.
The curve of her professional competence goes up, but the curve of her PBQ goes down. Eventually they cross, and she is rendered invisible, or she's fired.
It creates this pincer movement on a woman's career. Just as you're getting really good at your job, you're losing your qualification to even hold it.
And it's an economic trap, too. This is a point Wolf makes very clearly. If you are required to spend a massive chunk of your income just to maintain the look required to keep your job, you are effectively being paid less than your male counterpart.
Oh, absolutely. It's a tax.
It's a gender tax.
Yeah.
If a woman has to spend thousands or tens of thousands of dollars a year on maintenance, the wardrobe, the cosmetics, the hair, the diet products, maybe even surgery, just to be considered professional.
That's money that isn't going into her retirement fund or her kids' college savings.
Precisely. It keeps women economically insecure even as their salaries rise on paper. It recycles female wages right back into the very corporations that enforce the myth in the first place. It's a perfect closed loop.
Let's move to the next system, because it's just as powerful. Wolf calls it religion. And she doesn't mean Christianity or Judaism or Islam. She means the cult of beauty itself.
This is a really powerful sociological analysis. Wolf observes that at the time she was writing, Western society was becoming increasingly secular. But humans seem to have this fundamental need for ritual, for meaning, for a framework of good and bad.
A way to organize life.
Exactly. Wolf argues that as the influence of traditional religion declined, the beauty myth stepped right in to fill that void. And it has all the trappings of a formal religion.
It has its own scripture.
The women's magazines, they provide the gospel. They give you commandments on how to live, how to eat, how to behave. They tell you what constitutes a sin fat, wrinkles, letting yourself go.
And then they offer the path to redemption.
Through consumption, of course.
The holy oils are the anti-aging creams and the serums.
Correct. And like many fundamentalist religions, it relies on a constant cycle of guilt and purification. You are never finished. You are never truly saved.
It is a state of eternal deferral.
That's a great way to put it. You are always working toward a salvation, the perfect body, the perfect face. That is biologically impossible to achieve, let alone maintain permanently. There's always a new sin to atone for.
And it's interesting how she frames the fear of aging in this religious context. It's treated almost like a moral failing. If you look old, it's not just biology. It's because you didn't work hard enough or you didn't buy the right product.
You've fallen from grace.
Exactly. You didn't have enough faith in the system.
And this has a specific political utility when it comes to the relationships between generations of women. Historically, in many cultures, older women were the keepers of wisdom. They were the matriarchs, the ones with the power and the stories.
Yeah, elders.
By framing aging as unbeautiful or even disgusting, the myth effectively severs the link between generations of women. Young women are taught to fear becoming old women. Old women are taught to envy and resent young women. It breaks the continuity of female power.
You can't build solidarity on that foundation.
You can't. If you're afraid of your future self, you cannot plan for long-term power. You're trapped in the immediate present, desperately trying to freeze time.
Which leads us to perhaps the most visceral part of the book, and the one that really hits you in the gut: hunger. Wolf talks about eating disorders not as personal tragedies or mental illnesses in isolation.
Which they are, on an individual level.
Of course, but she frames them as a form of political sedation.
This is a challenging but essential reframe. We are so used to thinking of anorexia or bulimia as purely personal neuroses or family dysfunction or cries for help. But Wolf suggests we zoom out and look at the political utility of a hungry population.
What does she mean by that?
A population that is semi-starved is a population that is easier to govern.
And she has evidence for this.
Yeah.
She brings up the Minnesota starvation experiment from the 1940s. This wasn't about body image originally, right?
Not at all. It was a scientific study on conscientious objectors during World War II. The goal was to understand the physiology of starvation to help rehabilitate victims of the widespread famine in Europe.
So what did they do?
They took a group of healthy young men and severely restricted their caloric intake over a period of months. The results were startling, especially psychologically.
They didn't just lose weight.
No. The men became lethargic. They became obsessed with food. They would cut it into tiny bites, collect recipes, talk about food constantly. But crucially, for Wolf's argument, they became mentally foggy and deeply apolitical.
They lost their will to rebel.
Exactly. They couldn't focus on abstract concepts like democracy or freedom or fascism. Their entire world shrank to the size of a plate. They could only focus on their hunger and their next meal.
That is genuinely terrifying when you apply it to the modern context of dieting culture.
It is. If you are obsessively counting every calorie, if you are physically weak from lack of nutrition, you simply do not have the energy for complex political activism. You don't have the mental clarity to organize a revolution or write a novel or run for office.
Wolf notes a pretty chilling correlation here. She says that eating disorders rose exponentially at the exact same time that women were demanding the most political power.
She argues this isn't a coincidence. It's a systemic, albeit subconscious, mechanism to keep high-achieving women mentally and physically depleted.
It's the third shift again, but this time it's internal. It's the mental real estate that's constantly occupied by the calorie count.
But it serves to pathologize female ambition. Look at the language used around dieting, discipline, control, conquering the self, being good. It mimics the language of empowerment. I am in control of my body.
But the result is a physically weakened class of people.
It turns the desire for control inward, against one's own body rather than outward, against an unjust society. It's a brilliant and insidious deflection mechanism.
Which brings us to the fourth system, violence. Wolf uses this incredibly intense metaphor throughout the book, the Iron Maiden.
It's a very powerful image.
Can you describe it?
The Iron Maiden was a supposed medieval torture device, a coffin-sized box shaped like a woman, lined with sharp spikes on the inside. The victim was placed inside, the lid was closed, and they were impaled.
And her argument is that the modern beauty myth is a new kind of Iron Maiden.
A psychological and increasingly a surgical one. We are asked to fit ourselves into this rigid, cruel, inhuman shell that bears no resemblance to actual human diversity. And if we don't fit, we are told to cut away the parts of ourselves that stick out.
This is where she gets into cosmetic surgery. And we have to remember, she's writing this in the early 90s. The industry was already huge then. About $300 million a year. It's, what, tens of billions now?
It's astronomical now. She compares the practices of cosmetic surgery to a violation of the Hippocratic Oath.
She goes even further. She invokes the Nuremberg Code.
She does, and that is a very heavy, provocative comparison, but you have to follow her logic. The Nuremberg Code was established after World War II to prevent medical experimentation on human beings without their consent. A core principle is do no harm.
So her argument is that surgeons are doing harm.
They're cutting into healthy tissue. They are putting patients at risk of death, infection, nerve damage, or disfigurement, not to cure a disease, but to cure ugliness. But ugliness is a culturally manufactured condition, not a medical one.
She calls it the medicalization of normality.
That's the chilling phrase, the medicalization of normality. It means taking normal human variations, fat deposits on your thighs, small breasts, a large nose, wrinkles from smiling, asymmetry, and reclassifying them as medical pathologies that require surgical intervention.
It normalizes pain. It normalizes mutilation.
Exactly. Wolf points out that we would consider it barbaric if a political regime forced a class of people to undergo painful, risky surgeries to keep their jobs or be accepted in society. But when the free market does it, we call it self-improvement.
We call it empowerment.
We call it a choice.
And it connects right back to the workplace. It shifts from being a vanity choice for the wealthy to a professional necessity for the average working woman. If you want to stay employed as an anchorwoman or increasingly any public-facing role, you have to undergo the knife. You have to endure the violence to survive economically.
So we've looked at the workplace, religion, hunger, and violence. Now, let's try to map this out as a complete system. Because the whole mission of crisis in perception is to see the machine as a whole, to see how the parts fit together.
Okay, let's start with the actors. Who are the key players driving this system?
Well, first you have the employers. As we discussed, they use the PBQ to control labor costs and enforce hierarchy. If I can fire you because you don't look right, I have an incredible amount of control over you that goes way beyond your job performance.
Okay, so employers. Then you have the media institutions, magazines, TV, and now, obviously, the internet and social media.
Their role is to create what Wolf calls the hallucination of the ideal woman. This hallucination is always just out of reach. It creates a permanent gap between reality and the ideal.
And that gap is where the money is made.
That gap is where all the money is made. You sell products to bridge the gap, but the bridge is never finished because the ideal is a fantasy. It's retouched, it's genetically impossible, it's 17 years old.
Which brings us to the industries. The multi-billion-dollar fashion, diet, cosmetic, and surgical industries. They are the direct financial beneficiaries of female insecurity. They sell the holy oils and the promise of redemption.
And finally, let's not forget the legal system, which, as we saw in those cases, often upholds the right of employers to discriminate based on appearance, solidifying the PBQ as a legitimate business practice.
Okay, so those are the actors. What about the incentives? What makes the system go?
Well, for the industries, it's obviously profit extraction, billions and billions of dollars. But for the broader patriarchal structure, the political side of things, the incentive is different. It's labor compliance and, critically, distraction.
That distinction is so key. The cosmetic company wants your money. The political structure wants your silence and your energy.
Precisely. The goal of the third shift is to ensure women have no time or energy left for political organization or dissent. And then there's competitive individualism,
Preventing solidarity.
pitting women against each other for a prize that doesn't even exist.
Which is fueled by the narratives the system tells. Like, beauty equals worth.
Or aging is failure. That aging is a disease to be cured, not a natural process.
And maybe the most powerful one, discipline, like starvation or surgery, is empowerment.
Yes. Taking a system of control and rebranding it as a personal choice for self-improvement.
Which creates these vicious feedback loops. Can you walk us through one?
Sure. It starts with manufactured insecurity, which is amplified by media. That insecurity leads to consumption buying the cream, the diet plan, the procedure. That consumption inevitably fails because the ideal is unattainable. That failure doesn't lead to questioning the system. It leads to exhaustion and self-blame. I didn't try hard enough, or I don't have enough willpower.
And that exhaustion leads to reduced political engagement.
Which allows the system to persist and strengthen, which in turn creates more insecurity. And the loop begins again. It effectively privatizes a systemic problem. Instead of saying, why is our society so hostile to aging women? Well, the system makes you say, I need to get Botox.
Now, we have to address the elephant in the room. Naomi Wolf wrote The Beauty Myth over 30 years ago, so we have to ask, what does this system look like today? Because in some ways, it feels like we've moved forward. We have the body positivity movement. We see more diverse models in ads sometimes. But in other ways,
In many, many ways, the system has simply perfected itself. It has become more efficient. Wolf predicted the myth would have to mutate to survive, and it absolutely has.
how so?
She wrote about the surgical age. We are now in the injectable age. The barrier to entry for invasive modification is much lower. It's not just a major facelift at 50 anymore. It's preventative Botox and fillers for women in their 20s.
So the medicalization of normality has accelerated.
It's accelerated to include prevention of aging before it even happens. It's framed as responsible self-care.
And what about the display professions concept? That has just exploded. It used to be just models, actresses, and maybe flight attendants. Now, with social media, everyone is in a display profession.
That is probably the single most significant mutation of the myth. The PBQ, the professional beauty qualification, has migrated from the office to the algorithm. We all carry a broadcasting station in our pockets.
The currency of beauty is now literal digital currency.
It's likes, it's engagement, it's monetization, it's influencer sponsorships. The pressure to maintain the bunny image isn't just for Playboy waitresses anymore. It's for anyone with an Instagram or TikTok account who wants to be seen as successful or even just normal.
And the filters. Wolf talks about airbrushing in magazines being this lie that women measure themselves against. But now we airbrush ourselves in real time. We are actively creating the hallucination for ourselves and of ourselves.
It's the democratization of the Iron Maiden. We are now our own art directors, our own ruthless photo retouchers, and our own supervisors. The third shift has completely merged with our leisure time.
You can't even relax on a vacation without documenting it.
And if you document it, you have to look the part. You have to perform relaxation beautifully.
And in the actual workplace, think about Zoom, video calls. You are constantly looking at a little reflection of yourself while you're trying to work. That boundary between the public face and the private self is completely gone.
You are performing the PBQ in your own living room now. The surveillance is constant.
Wolf's observation that ugliness is being reclassified as disease has also found a new, powerful home in the modern wellness industry.
Oh, absolutely. It's often just the beauty myth in a lab coat. The obsession with gut health or biohacking or clean eating often leads to the exact same caloric restriction and obsession with purity that the old religious rites demanded, just with new science-y terminology.
It's still about disciplining the body to conform to a very narrow ideal.
It is.
So connecting this all back to the core themes of crisis and perception, the central theme here that I see is power disguised as choice.
That is the absolute crux of it. The brilliance of this modern system of control is that it relies on women believing they are choosing these behaviors. I'm doing this for me. I just want to feel good about myself. I'm doing it for my health.
But is it a real choice?
Wolf argues that this rhetoric of choice masks the coercion. If you stop shading your legs or you stop dyeing your gray hair and you face social ridicule, disgust from potential partners, or even professional setbacks, was it really a free choice to begin with? Or was it a choice made under duress?
It's perception management on a massive societal scale. The beauty myth replaces the messy, complicated reality of women who are diverse, aging, powerful, different shapes and sizes, with a hallucination, as she calls it, of a generic, ageless, thin ideal.
And the ultimate paradox is structural control versus freedom. In a so-called free society, you can't just pass a law saying women must be obedient. You can't legally ban women from the workplace anymore. So the most effective control is the one that operates inside the subject's own head.
It's psychological policing.
It makes the subject police herself. The panopticon isn't a guard tower in the town square anymore. It's the mirror. It's the front-facing camera.
So after all this analysis, where do we go from here? Wolf calls for a third wave in her conclusion. It's been 30 years, but the solution she proposes still feels incredibly relevant. What is it?
It starts, I think, with seeing beauty as a governance system, not as an aesthetic one. Once you see it as politics, you stop blaming yourself. You stop looking in the mirror and seeing personal failure. You start seeing a marketing demographic. You start seeing the bars of the Iron Maiden.
She talks about the need to release the energy that is consumed by the third shift.
Imagine it. Just imagine if the collective energy women spend on hunger, on worrying about their skin, on recovering from surgery, on that constant mental calculus of calories and carbs, imagine if all that energy was released back into the world.
What would happen?
It would go into art, into politics, into science, into solving the climate crisis. It would be a massive infusion of human power and creativity. It would be revolutionary.
And the key mechanism for that release is solidarity.
Yes, that's the only way out. Wolf argues that the only way to dismantle the myth is for women to refuse to play the market value game with each other, to stop judging other women's appearances, to see other women not as competitors for the male gaze or for professional validation, but as allies in a shared system.
We would need a pro-woman redefinition of beauty.
One that is non-competitive, non-hierarchical, and rooted in character and action, not appearance.
It's about rejecting the scarcity mindset, refusing to believe that beauty is some limited resource that we have to fight each other for.
And maybe most importantly, rejecting the idea that our bodies are projects to be constantly worked on and finished. They are the vehicles for our lives, not the rent we pay to exist in the world.
That is a very powerful place to land. It really forces you to rethink every ad you see, every scroll through social media, and even the way you speak to your friends and to yourself.
It changes the fundamental question. It changes it from, how do I look, to who benefits from me feeling this way?
Who profits from my insecurity?
Exactly.
We want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. Wolf wrote this before the internet and social media truly took hold. Today, we are seeing the rise of AI-generated influencers, literally fake women created by code who are perfectly beautiful according to the algorithm, selling products to real human beings.
If the Iron Maiden can now be generated by a machine completely detached from biology or reality, what does that mean for the future of human self-perception? Are we now competing with ghosts?
The Beauty Myth by Naomi Wolf. It is a dense, challenging, and, we believe, an absolutely essential read for understanding the systems we live in. We highly recommend grabbing a copy for the detailed legal and historical analysis we couldn't fully cover here.
This project is free and publicly accessible. If you'd like to support the time, tools, and research behind Crisis in Perception, you can become a supporter on Patreon.
For a shorter visual overview of this topic, see the mini explainer linked in the description.
If you enjoy this kind of systems-level analysis, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.